We shall now begin with the section of geometry. Geometry is very kind of vast, if I were to say. It has lots of concepts, guys, but we need to be focusing on only the important theorems and specifically their applications, because theorems are the theory is not important. What is important is you should be able to figure out when to apply what. Okay, so first I'll be going through a few school basics, revising the concepts, and then jumping on to the application. So the very first is lines, angles, and to be more specific, it has to be points and lines. So you should know the fundas of non-collinear points, collinear points, and collinear are basically in a straight line. Non-collinear is something haywire in the plane. Same thing goes with the coplanar, that if all the points lie in the same plane, then they are called as planar, coplanar. And as you can see that this x2, y2, z2 is not lying in the same plane. So whenever you're talking about the planes, we'll be dealing with three axes, guys. One would be x and y axis, which is our plane, the plane on which you are writing on your books and everything, and this would be coming outside of the book. Okay, so this is something your book. If you imagine a perpendicular line coming outside of your notebook or page, whatever you are writing on, that axis would be your z axis. Okay, so anything on your page will be lying on your same plane, but if I'm talking about a point in the air above your page, then that will be not in the same plane, hence called as non-coplanar. You should know what's parallel lines, perpendicular lines. Parallel lines, the angle is 0 or 180. Perpendicular lines have to have the angle as 90. The ones which are intersecting any other angles, basically any obtuse angle or any acute angle, then they are just called intersecting lines. Concurrent lines are the lines which pass through one single point. What's perpendicular bisector? So perpendicular is any random 90-degree angle. But if I say that there's a line cutting the other line at 90 degrees and it is also bisecting the line, that line will be called as a perpendicular bisector. This is the school way of drawing the perpendicular bisector. We used to take compass and more than half the distance. So you draw something arcs like this, and from this point also using the same distance, and then you draw the line something, and that gives you your perpendicular bisector. Angles. There are 6 types of angles. Acute angle, anything less than 90. So anything from 0 to 90 is your acute angle. Exactly 90 will be right angle. Anything between 90 and 180, that would be your obtuse angle. Exactly 180 would be a straight line, or you can say straight angle. Anything between 180 360 is called as reflex angle. And if it is exactly 360, it has to be a complete circle, or we call it as a full angle. Again, a few important terms is complementary and supplementary. So any two angles adding up to 90 are called as complementary. And similarly, if I'm giving a straight line, it's obvious that the addition has to be 180. So whenever two angles add to 180, they are called as supplementary angles. Adjacent angles have to be the angles which are side by side, and this we shall discuss when we talk about the parallel lines in much detail. So angles along a point, so if I'm giving you a single point and I'm giving you multiple lines passing through this, the addition of all the small angles around the point has to be always 360. And yeah, so if this is like 240 and total is 360, this x value would be 120 as an example. Like we have line bisectors, we have angle bisectors also. So if I say that the total angle was 36 degrees, the angle bisector will give you 18 degrees and 18 degrees. Now angle bisector could be inside also, angle bisector could be outside also. So we'll be talking about it when we discuss in triangles, but this is just an example. If I talk about ABC, and what y'all can see over here, x and x is the external angle A. Even this is angle A, right? This would be the external angle A. So as you can see, AD is the external bisector. You can have an internal angle bisector also. So something like ABC, if I draw the angle bisector of the inside angle, okay, something Y and Y, So this AE would be your internal angle bisector, and AD, what you all can see in the previous X and X, that would be the external angle bisector. Whenever there are two or more lines cut by a third line, okay, so that is called as a transversal line. We'll be talking about it more specifically to the parallel line. So whenever there are two or more parallel lines, it is cut by another line which is cutting all, passing through all. So that line is called as the transversal line. And since it is passing through the parallel lines, it will make sets of angles. As you all can see from the diagram, it makes 8 angles, and every angle has some peculiar names. And before that, you should know what are exterior and interior. So anything which comes in between the parallel lines, okay, anything which comes between the parallel will be referred to as interior, and anything outside those will be exterior. So these are your 4 types of angles. Corresponding angles are in the shape of F. Every time you come across the shape of F, these 2 angles will always be same. Now the F could be like this, or F could be mirror imaged, or F could be a straight line, or F could be something inverted. Does not matter. Whenever you see the F shape, the angles will always be same. Next is your alternate angles. Alternate angles, as you all can see, the transversal will cut like this, and whenever you come across the shape of Z, so these 2 angles will always be same. So Z could be like this, or Z could be something open, or Z could be inverse, but these 2 angles will always be same. Co-interior angles, they are not same, but they will tell you that whenever you come across the shape of C, okay, these 2 angles are not same, but they'll always add up to, like X plus Y will always add up to 180 degrees. So whether this is X or Y, or this is something A plus B, okay, something A and B, A plus B also would be 180 only. Last but not the least is the vertically opposite angles. Vertically opposite angles are always in the shape of X. So whenever 2 lines are intersecting, for vertically opposite you don't require parallel lines. Any 2 lines crossing each other, the angles on the opposite sides are always equal. So when I'm talking about 2 parallel lines in a transversal, this will form the pair of vertical opposite angles. Next, if I talk about the distance between the 2 parallel lines, so whenever we have 2 or more parallel lines and a transversal passes, I can have multiple transversals. We have a rule that the distance between them are always in proportion. So if I say A by B and X by Y, this ratio A by B will be equal to X by Y. Only the ratio will be same, because I could have parallel lines like this also. I could have one straight line. So it's obvious that the distance, this distance and this as compared to this and this, if I term this as perpendicular distance has to be shortest. So it's obvious that A is not equal to X. But what I can say is the ratio A by B would be equal to X by Y. Talking about the triangles, the types, there are 3 types: equilateral, isosceles, scalene, that's by sides. And if I talk about the types of triangles as per angles, there are 3 types: acute, right and obtuse. And then there are different variations of mix and match. So acute scalene, obtuse scalene, acute isosceles, obtuse isosceles, scalene right, equilateral, isosceles right, so on and so forth. What are the properties of triangles? The very first basic property is that the sum of the angles is always 180 of the interior angles. And whenever we talk about the exterior angle, may it be any polygon, triangle, quadrilateral, pentagon, hexagon, the interiors will be different. But if you look at the sum of exterior angles of any polygon is always 360. Talking about the inequality theorem of the triangles is that the sum of the 2 sides is always greater than the third. So if I consider 7, 8, 9, 7 plus 8 is 15 greater than 9, 8 plus 9 17 greater than 7, 9 plus 7 16 greater than 8. You take any 2 sides, guys, the sum always has to be greater than 2. If not, if it does not satisfy, that is not a triangle. Like you all can see over here, 3 plus 6 greater than 2, Another pair 2 plus 6 uh, is greater than 3, and last pair 2 plus 3 is 5. 5 is not greater than 6. So since it is not satisfying, we can say that this is not a triangle. You can take any triangle for that example and you can verify whether it will be a triangle or no. So the properties are simple. Sum has to be greater than the third and the difference of any two has to be lesser than the third. Then talking about the Pythagoras theorem, like Pythagoras theorem used for identify the type of triangles. Whenever the square of the two shorter sides is equal to the square of the third side, that triangle is always a right angle triangle. If it's an obtuse angle triangle, the sum of the squares of the two shorter sides, so basically over here 3, 4 and 6, I will take 3 square and 4 square, that would be 25. If it's the square is lesser than the square of the largest side, then it is always an obtuse angle triangle. And in acute angle triangle, the square of the sum of the square of the two shorter sides will always be greater than the square of the largest side. So these are the tests. Some theorems. The very first theorem is the exterior angle theorem. Exterior angle theorem says that in a triangle, whenever I draw an exterior angle, the measure of the exterior angle is always equal to the sum of its opposite interior angles, which are also called as remote interior angles. You can go to the example. Basic proportionality theorem. This is nothing but an extension of the theorem we did in parallel lines. So the parallel lines property was, I said that the distance between them are always in proportion. But if you try to check, these lines are going to sometimes meet. So which is nothing but going to form a triangle. So that's nothing but the same. So as you can see, these are two parallel lines and these are the two transversals. It is just saying that the ratio a by b is equal to x by y. So in a triangle, whenever you have a line parallel to the base, the sides will be broken down into the ratio. So x by y is equal to a by b. This is a proof if somebody requires to verify. Otherwise it is not required. Next is an angle bisector theorem. Angle bisector theorem says that in a triangle, whenever you have an angle bisector, okay, so let's say ABC, AD is the angle bisector. So by angle bisector theorem, we have the sides from where the angle bisector has originated. Angle bisector originates from the vertex, but the vertex joining the two sides, that ratio AB by AC is equivalent to where it cuts, the side which it cuts. So it's basically BD upon DC. We had already talked about an external angle bisector. So if you have, let's say, an external angle bisector AE, okay, which will bisect angle A externally, still the theorem does not change. The sides will still remain the same. So even if you have a diagram like this which says ABC and you have an external angle bisector, okay, so AD is the external angle bisector, the theorem will still remain the same. It will still say AB upon AC is equal to AD dash upon D dash C if I denote the point as D dash. So that's your internal angle bisector and external angle bisector. So as you can see, that has been proved whether it is internal or external. The proof is not important. What is important is the application. So you can go to this example. Again, this is the proof of angle bisector theorem. This is the proof of midpoint theorem. But what does the midpoint theorem say? A midpoint theorem says that in a triangle, if I am having a line passing through the two sides, but it is passing through the midpoints of those two sides, okay, so whenever this is the case, it will tell you that the line which is passing through, that is parallel to the base. So for example, in triangle ABC, D is the midpoint of AB and E is the midpoint of AC. So it will conclude that D is parallel to BC and also that D is half of BC.
So if I want to say it in a statement form, a line which passes through the midpoints of the two sides is parallel to the third side and is half of the third side. This is the proof if somebody requires. If you talk about the geometric centers, there are 4 geometric centers. One is circumcenter, incenter, centroid, orthocenter. So as you can see that centroid is created by medians, orthocenter is constructed by the perpendiculars or altitudes, incenter is created by the angle bisectors, and the circumcenter is created with the help of perpendicular bisectors. So every geometric center is formed by some or the other lines of a triangle. So to remember this, like the perpendicular bisectors create circumcenter, angle bisector incenter, median centroid, we have what we say as a shortcut to remember. So this is just a fun statement. Peanut butter cookies are best in milk chocolate and Ovaltine. Indian public is not used to Ovaltine, so we can replace this Ovaltine with Oreo if you wish to. So peanut butter cookies are best in milk chocolate and Oreo something, or we can say Oreo milkshake, because cookies are already there. Anyways, talking about the median. Median is a line which is originated from the vertex and cuts the opposite side into two equal halves. As you can see on the bottom right, centroid always lies inside the triangle, whether it is acute, right, or obtuse. Centroid is always inside. Centroid is the meeting point of 3 medians. So if I draw the median over here and then I draw the third median, 3 medians always coincide at one point, or you can say that these are concurrent lines passing through one single point. That point, meeting point, is called as a centroid, denoted by capital G. Another property, as you can see the shaded region, that whenever you draw 3 medians, the triangle gets divided into 6 equal parts. So basically, if I say that the area over here is 48, the total area of the entire triangle, okay, so the area of each shorter triangle, okay, small triangle, has to be 8. That is one of the useful property of medians. So one median will divide into 2 parts. So if I'm talking about a single median and the area is 24, the areas would be 12 and 12. Similarly, if I would have divided in 6 parts, the area would have been 4, 4, 4 everywhere. Another property of the centroid is that it divides the median in the ratio 2:1. The longer part is 2 and the shorter part is always 1. And one more property, if I'm talking about the medians, that whenever, if I construct another triangle with respect to the midpoints of the sides, okay, whenever you construct a triangle with respect to the midpoint, so a triangle inside, that triangle divides the entire area in 4 parts. So again, if the area of the entire triangle would have been 24, so we've learned that in medians, when I draw the 3 medians, it divides in 6 equal parts. So it will be 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. But when another triangle is constructed using these midpoints, that triangle divides the entire triangle in 4 equal parts. So it would be 6, 6, 6, and 6. Next is your Apollonius principle. Apollonius principle is used to find the length of the median. So the theorem says AB square plus AC square is twice of AD square plus BD square. So if I want to denote in a diagram format, if I have a triangle ABC and I have just one median, so again, like in angle bisector theorem, but this time it would be the sum of the squares. So the sum of the squares are the sides from where the median is originating. So AB square plus AC square is twice of the length of the median. So entire AD plus from where it is getting bisected. So you say BD or you say DC, does not matter. That is your theorem. Again, this is the proof if somebody requires. Next important property with respect to medians and the sides of the triangle is that 3 times the sum of the squares of the sides. Okay, 3 times the sum of the squares of the sides is always equal to 4 times the sum of the squares of the medians. How do I remember this? Is that in a triangle generally I have 3 sides. I know even medians are 3, but medians is not often talked about generally. Okay, so sides is something what we deal with in day-to-day life. We're talking about geometry and triangles. So sides is 3, so that's how I remember this. 3 times the sum of the squares of the sides is equal to 4 times the sum of the squares of the medians. Altitudes are nothing but the heights, as we've already seen in the slides before, that altitudes, when I draw 3 altitudes of a triangle, okay, so basically perpendicular from here, perpendicular from here, and perpendicular from here, the Pythagoras, or you can say that the Greek word for perpendicular is nothing but ortho. So if there are 3 orthos drawn, the center is called as orthocenter. So the meeting point of all the 3 perpendiculars is known as orthocenter. Orthocenter of an acute angle triangle is inside. Of a right angle is at the vertex of the 90 degree. So wherever you have 90 degree, the vertex of that 90 degree measure will always be your orthocenter. And obtuse angle, since if I talk about an obtuse angle in general, its height sometimes lie outside the triangle. So since the height lies outside, it's obvious that its orthocenter will also lie outside. One more thing we need to remember is that orthocenter is always drawn from the vertex. Okay, if you see, the perpendiculars are always drawn from the vertex of the triangle, so it has nothing to deal with the medians. Next, if I talk about perpendicular bisectors, okay, perpendicular bisectors never originate from the vertex except for equilateral triangle or isosceles triangle. So if I draw 3 perpendicular bisectors of a triangle, that meeting point is called as the circumcenter. As you can see, acute angle triangle is inside, right angle triangle is always on the hypotenuse, and obtuse angle, the circumcenter, is outside. One of the important properties of circumcenter is that it is equidistant from the center. This is equidistant from the center. So you can say only in a right angle triangle, circumcenter is always in the center of the hypotenuse. Okay, center of the hypotenuse. Or you can say in a right angle triangle, whenever you draw a circumcenter, these 3 measures are always equal. Or you can say that this is half of the hypotenuse. Again, if we have the center and the property that it is equidistant from the sides, as you can see in this diagram, circumcenter is equidistant from the vertices x, y, z. So with the help of that, this circumradius is constructed. So with the center and the radius, we can construct a circle which is called as circumcenter. So in an acute angle triangle, the center is inside, the circle will be circumscribing. Even in obtuse angle, it will be circumscribing, it will pass through all the vertices of the triangle, but just that the circumcenter is outside, the circle corresponding to that triangle will be very big. Last but not the least, angle bisector. If you join 3 angle bisectors, it gives you the incenter. The property of incenter is that its distance, like circumcenter was equidistant from the vertices, incenter is equidistant. So if I just draw it, incenter, if you draw perpendiculars from the incenters to the sides, that radius or that distance is constant, which is called as the in radius, denoted by small r, and with the help of that we construct a circle inside the triangle which touches all the 3 sides, called as incircle. Next is the Euler's line, which gives me the relation between the circumcenter, centroid, and the orthocenter. So some people call it as Euler's line, some people call it as Euler's line, but whatever you say, you just have to know that it gives you the ratio. The centroid, okay, centroid denoted by capital G, always divides the orthocenter and the circumcenter, okay, in the ratio 2:1. Okay, guys. How do I remember this? This is like alphabetical. Circumcenter is C, centroid is G, and orthocenter is O. You'll see this CGO ratio is 1:2. Isosceles triangle, a very important property. Only when you drop the perpendicular from the vertex which joins the two same sides. Okay. Even if I draw a isosceles triangle like this, the height can be constructed from here also. The height can be constructed from here also. But I'm not interested in these heights. The height which I'm interested in is from the vertex where the two same sides connect each other. So the special property of this altitude is that all the geometric centers are collinear and lie on the altitude of this isosceles triangle. Okay, so since I'm saying that COGI lie every geometric center lies on this altitude, we can say that this line is the altitude, the angle bisector, the median, perpendicular bisector, everything. These are the exclusive properties of isosceles triangle. We have a ready-made formula for calculating the area of the triangle. If somebody wants to mug up. And the isosceles triangle properties, that the two equal sides, there is one line of symmetry, the two angles opposite to the equal sides are equal, and the altitude A bisects the base and the apex angle into two equal parts, forming two congruent right angle triangles. So that's what we said, that the geometric centers. This is the median, this is the angle bisector, this is the perpendicular bisector, everything. If we talk about the equilateral triangle, like in isosceles triangle, equilateral triangle has all the sides same, and the height which is dropped, that again is everything. It's altitude, angle bisector, median, perpendicular bisector. But the only difference between an isosceles triangle and equilateral triangle is that here the point is concurrent and not collinear. Concurrent, that means everything. You talk about the circumcenter, you talk about the orthocenter, you talk about the median, the centroid, or you talk about the incenter. Every point is lying at the same point. Okay, so if I talk about first the median center is G. Median divides the centroid divides the median in the ratio 2:1. So basically this ratio is 2. Another is orthocenter. Orthocenter does not have such many properties. Then we have circumcenter. Circumcenter, the distance from the circumcenter to the vertex is your capital R, called as circumradius. And last but not the least, incenter. The perpendicular distance from the incenter to the vertex to the side is called as the inradius. So this tells me that R upon R, which is nothing but 2/1, only in an equilateral triangle I will have the circumradius is always twice of the inradius. Okay, those are the properties of your equilateral triangle. Equilateral triangle formula standard, I have area of equilateral triangle as √3/4 side square, and height of the equilateral triangle is given by √3/2 times the side.
Next, moving on to the right angle triangles. Everybody is aware about the Pythagoras theorem, that the hypotenuse square has to be equal to the sum of the squares of the other two sides. Hypotenuse has to be the largest side. Talking about the Pythagoras triplets. Pythagoras triplets are the values which satisfy the Pythagoras theorem. Besides the standard triplets that you need to remember, so that you save time in your exams, there's also a way of generating the triplets. You can like generate your own triplets from odd numbers and even numbers also. So from odd number, you just have to do square and half. So for example, if I take 3, 4, 5, okay, 3 is an odd number, you square it, okay, and just take the half. So 4.5, you have to deal with the integers lower than the half and higher than the half. So basically 4 and 5. So these are your triplets. Let's talk about 5, 12, 13. 5 is an odd number, square is 25, half is 12.5, and 12 and 13 are the triplets with 5. Odd and even have to have opposite properties, so it's half and square, so it's the reverse of that. So let's talk about 8, 15 and 17. 8's half is 4, 4 square is 16. Again deal with the integers lower and the higher. So basically 15 and 17. As you can see, these are your triplets. Let's take some other value. Let's talk about 12. 12 half is 6, 6 square is 36. 35 and 37 form a triplet with 12. There will obviously be a few values which will not satisfy these things, but generally most of the cases are covered with this. For example, if we take 20, 21 and 29. 20 is an even number, so 20 even, half is 10, its square is 100. So 20, 101 and 102. So there are a few values which will not satisfy, but generally the cases which are coming in exam generally get covered in this concept. Let's talk about the properties of isosceles right angle triangle. So if you have an isosceles right angle triangle, then the side opposite to 45 is given by 1 by root 2 times the hypotenuse, and side opposite to 30 in the 30-60 triangle is given by half of hypotenuse, and side opposite to 60 is root 3 by 2 times the hypotenuse. So as you can see, if the hypotenuse is 2, the sides will be 1 and root 3. So basically 30, 60 and 90, standard ratio that you can remember, the ratio of the sides is 1 is to root 3 is to 2. Similarly, if here the hypotenuse is root 2, and if you substitute root 2 instead, this will get cancelled and will give you the sides which are equal as 1. There are 4 tests of similarity. One is SSS, which is side, side, side. Then you have side angle side. Then you have angle side angle and right hypotenuse side. Oh, these are the congruency tests. Similarity will be on the next slide. So 4 tests for congruency. Whenever these conditions get satisfied, I can say that the two triangles are congruent. What do I mean by congruent triangles is each and everything exactly the same. The measurement of the sides have to be same, measure of angles have to be same, so on and so forth. Basically, so that even if you overlap the two triangles, when you overlap the two triangles, it should look or it should seem to be only a single triangle. Similar triangles has only 3 properties, or there are only 3 tests to identify whether the triangles are similar or no. AA, SAS and SSS. In congruent, you have to have the angles same and the sides also congruent. But in similar triangles, angles have to be same for sure, angles have to be congruent, but the sides have to be in proportion. Sides don't need to be congruent, because if the sides become congruent, that will lead you to congruent triangles. And similar triangles, you need to have them in ratio. So the first one is SSS, so basically something like 5, 6, 7 and 15, 18 and 21. You can see that the ratio is 1:3. These two triangles are similar by SSS test. Okay, next if I have 5, 30 and 6, and I have 10, 30 and 12. So if you have seen the ratio 1:2 and the angle between those sides is same, by SAS the two triangles are called similar. Similar triangles properties is that whenever the two triangles are similar, all angles have to be congruent, the sides have to be in proportion, and so if I say that triangle ABC is similar to triangle PQR, so the very first thing you can say that all angles are same for sure. And the other thing what you all can say is that the sides are in proportion. So basically AB upon PQ is equal to BC upon QR, is equal to AC upon PR, and which is also equivalent to the perimeters ratio. So perimeter of triangle ABC upon perimeter of triangle PQR. Let's say all these ratio, if they're equivalent to X. The important property of similar triangle is that the ratios of the similar triangle. So basically here area of triangle ABC upon area of triangle PQR would be X. No, it would be X square. Okay, so the important thing you need to remember is that the ratios of the sides is equivalent to the perimeter ratio, but the area ratio would be the square of that. Let's move on to the second part of geometry, that's quadrilaterals and polygons. So first let's discuss the polygon types, because quadrilateral will be a sub part of polygons. Polygon is nothing but a closed-sided figure, a n-sided closed figure, but it cannot be curved. It has to be straight lines only. Hence, if you all see in the red, the semicircle, circles, anything which has curved shapes are not a polygon. And gon means angles, so you can say many angles or many sides. Okay, that's the simplest definition for any polygon. And these are some prefixes. For any 3, it's tri, 4 quad, 5 penta, 6 hexa, 7 hepta, some call it as septa also, 8 is octa, 9 is nona. Okay, so nona, it's called nonagon, and 10 is deca, and 12 is dodecagon. Important in this slide, besides the definition and the nomenclature, is the definition of a regular polygon. A regular polygon has equal sides and equal angles. Okay, so it has to have all the sides equal and all the angles also equal. Okay, this is the family tree, or you can say a flowchart of all the polygons. We'll be studying the quadrilaterals in details, and from the other polygons what you're going to study in detail is hexagons. We've already done the triangles. How to identify a polygon? Whenever just draw a straight line. If only 2 sides get cut, then that's a polygon. So regular polygon has already said that all sides are equal in length and all interangles are also equal. Irregular polygons is not important as such for our exams, but they could still be asked for any other problems like finding the angles or something. The other thing important is concave and convex polygons. Concave, as you all can see, the internal angle can be more than 180 also. So it's all about the internal angles. So concave polygon has at least one internal angle greater than 180, and convex polygon is all the internal angles, whatever the angles, all those angles have to be less than 180, the measure of those angles. So again, important over here is concave, convex, and regular. Sum of all angles is given by the standard formula of 180 into n minus 2. This is all based on the concept of triangle. So a triangle has only one single triangle. If I talk about any quadrilateral, it has 2 triangles. If I talk about a pentagon, it is made up of 3 triangles. If I'm talking about a 6-sided figure, so it is basically made up of 4 triangles. So this is like 180 into 1, this is 180 into 2, this is 180 into 3, and this is like 180 into 4. So as you can see, 3 sides 3 minus 2, 4 sides 4 minus 2, 5 sides 5 minus 2, so on and so forth. Hence your standard formula 180 into n minus 2. And if you want to find the average, you just have to divide by the number of sides or number of angles. That gives you the measure of each interior angle. This is helpful when you're talking about a regular polygon. So this entire formula is regarding interior angles in regular polygons, given by the formula 180 n minus 2, the total upon the number of angles. This is the relation of all the angles, lines of symmetry, diagonals, and so on and so forth. So diagonals, we have a standard formula. Diagonals of a polygon is given by the formula n into n minus 3 by 2. Standard formula applicable to any polygon, but it's only like convex polygon, not applicable for concave polygons. What is the area of a regular polygon? it's half into the perimeter into apothem. Apothem is the line drawn from the center of any regular polygon, and it has to be perpendicular to any of the sides. This is one of the examples. And regular polygon, this is a standard formula. Again, these kind of things are very rarely used, but no harm in remembering this standard formula, or it's very small, half into p into a, where p stands for perimeter and a stands for the measure of apothem. This is kind of difficult, so what we're going to deal with is only the quadrilaterals and a regular hexagon. So we're already done with the flowchart of the quadrilaterals. Talking about the trapezoid, trapezium has two sides parallel and the other two can be either equal or not equal. If at all there are two sides, the two non-parallel sides are equal, this will be called as an isosceles trapezium. One of the properties of isosceles trapezium is that it is always a cyclic quadrilateral. So whenever you draw a trapezium inside a circle, that will always be a cyclic quadrilateral. And perimeter is simple, sum of all sides. The area of a trapezium is given by the formula half into the sum of the parallel sides. So basically, like say if I say A and B and the height or the distance between them. So here I've given you the formula and also a couple of examples so I can go through. Very simple formula. The sum of the parallel sides and multiplied by the distance between them. Parallelogram. Parallelogram will be one step ahead of trapezium. It will have both the sets of opposite sides as parallel. So it will be parallel, it will be congruent. Opposite angles will also be congruent, because if you check, if these two are parallel lines, this will act as a transversal, and if I talk about the horizontal parallel lines, this will act as a transversal and this will act as interior pair. So consecutive angles are always supplementary using the concept of interior angles, and important property is diagonals bisect each other. One more important of parallelogram is regarding its diagonals and sides. So the property says that if I have the four sides A, B, C, D, and let's say the two diagonals are E and F, the property says that sum of the squares of the diagonals, basically E square plus F square, is equal to the sum of the squares of the sides. A square plus B square plus C square plus D square. And we know that the opposite sides have to be same. So this can also be written as twice of A square plus B square. Area of a parallelogram is given by simple formula, base into height, because if I talk about a parallelogram in general, the diagonal divides the triangles in two congruent parts. So if one triangle is half into base into height and the other is also half into base into height, when you club both half and half, you get 1 into base into height. That's a simpler derivation of area of a parallelogram. Next quadrilateral is rhombus. Again, one step ahead of parallelogram. Parallelogram has all the sides like opposite sides congruent, but rhombus is a parallelogram. Okay, rhombus is a parallelogram with all the sides congruent. Not about the angles, but it's only the sides same. So since it's a parallelogram, it will have all the properties, or it will inherit all the properties of parallelogram. In addition, rhombus has a few properties of its own, is that it has all the sides congruent. Diagonals are perpendicular bisector. This is one of the important properties, and diagonals are also the angle bisectors. So if this entire angle is 60, I can say the angle is 30, 30. If the entire angle is 120, I can say that the individual angles are 60, 60. Area of a rhombus is given by the formula half into the product of the diagonals. Or also if you know the side and the angle between the sides. So if you know the two sides and the angle between them, you can also use this formula to find the area of rhombus. Rectangle. Again, it's a parallelogram, but instead of all the sides being same, all the interior angles, the internal angles are congruent. So again, since it's a parallelogram, it will inherit all the properties, and there are two extra properties which are only pertaining to rectangles. So all the four angles are congruent and equal to 90, and the diagonals are congruent. Perimeter of a rectangle is given by twice of length plus breadth, and the area is given as length into breadth. Simple formula. Talking about a square, square is a combination of both rectangle and rhombus. So yes, it's a parallelogram, it is a rhombus, it is a rectangle, it is a rhombus having all angles same, it is a rectangle having all sides same. So opposites has a parallel, four right angles, four congruent sides, consecutive angles supplementary, diagonals are congruent, diagonals bisect each other, diagonals are perpendicular, and each diagonal bisects a pair of opposite angles. So it will inherit all the properties of whatever we discussed till now. This is all the quadrilaterals at once. What we're left with is kite and cyclic quadrilateral. So let's discuss them. Kite is a quadrilateral where the adjacent sides are congruent. So you have one pair of shorter sides and one pair of longer sides. The property of a kite is that the longer diagonal is the perpendicular bisector of the shorter diagonal, as you can see in this diagram, and it's also the angle bisector. So two pairs of consecutive congruent sides, perpendicular diagonals, top and bottom angles are bisected. One diagonal, basically it's only the short diagonal which is bisected, and only one pair of opposite congruent angles. Kite's area is similar to that of the rhombus. It's nothing but half into the product of the diagonals. Cyclic quadrilateral is a quadrilateral who has all its vertices on the circumference of the circle. So if you have such a quadrilateral, it's a cyclic quadrilateral. Any quadrilateral, any four-sided figure can be a cyclic quadrilateral, but we have a special quadrilateral that whenever we say that the trapezium is an isosceles trapezium, it always has to be a cyclic quadrilateral. Okay, cyclic quadrilateral property is that opposite angles always add to 180, so they are supplementary pairs. And this is a straight line pair. So I have C plus E is 180. I also have C plus A is 180 because the property of cyclic quadrilateral. So if I say by properties, by merging two properties, the external angle of a cyclic quadrilateral is always equal to the remote interior angle. Area of a cyclic quadrilateral is somewhat similar to the formula that we must see in the Heron's formula for area of a triangle. Here also S stands for semi-perimeter, and the only difference is in the Heron's formula you have one S outside and then you multiply by the difference of the three sides, S minus A, S minus B. The only difference is that you don't have an S over here. Okay, so that's the easy formula for finding the area of a cyclic quadrilateral, which is kind of called as or derived from the Ptolemy's theorem that the product of the diagonals is equal to AC plus BD. Basically, is the measure of the sides. A special polygon, regular polygon, a regular hexagon. A regular hexagon is made up of 6 equilateral triangles. Okay, a regular hexagon is equivalent to 6 equilateral triangles, as you all can see in the diagram. If one equilateral triangle is like root 3 by 4 side square, area of a regular hexagon would be 3 root 3 by 2 side square. So you either remember the standard formula or you remember from where and how it is derived, which is nothing but the same formula. Now, a regular hexagon has two types of diagonals. One is called as a short diagonal and the other is long diagonal. So as you all can see in this diagram, the leftmost, it has 3 long diagonals, and long diagonals, as you all can see from the diagram, they make up the side of the equilateral triangle. So basically this is made up of 2 equilateral triangle sides. So long diagonal is always twice the measure of the side of a regular hexagon. And when I'm talking about the short diagonal will be this ABC, this diagonal, and this diagonal. So these are your short diagonals. And short diagonals, if you see appropriately, it's made up of, if I draw these two triangles, it is made up of the height of this equilateral triangle and height of this equilateral triangle. So basically the two heights are combined. So one height is given by root 3 by 2 times side. So if I combine the two sides, 2 to 2, the short diagonal formula is root 3 times the side. Something to remember on your fingertips. Talking about the circles. Circles, again, you have points and lines in it. So the center is called center. Anything joining the center and the circumference is called the radius. Then if it joins any two random points, then that thing is called as chord. A part or the entire perimeter of the circle is called as a circumference. Then if you join a part of a circle, for example, if you look at this blue thing, so the chord and this arc together, that is called as the segment. Okay, a line which is only touching the circle at only one point, that line is called as tangent. Secant is the line passing through the circle. Okay, so basically if you just extend the chord, that will give you a secant. So you can say chord is a part of secant which is just inside the circle. Secant is a standard line. And as you can see, diameter is also touching any two random points in the circle, but the difference between the diameter and the chord is the diameter is a chord which passes through the center. So you can say that diameter is the largest chord of the circle. Then if I talk about a pastry in a cake, then this area or this part of a circle is called as a sector. So a sector has to make an angle with the center and the circumference of the circle. Rest, the nomenclatures are very simple. So the bigger part of your circumference is called as the major arc and the smaller part is called as minor arc. Then whenever the minor arc makes angle with the center of the circle is called as central angle. And whenever the angle is made with an arc on the circumference of the circle, that is called as an inscribed angle. Semicircle is exactly half of the perimeter of the circle, so half of the circumference. Minor arc always is less than 180. Semicircle measures 180, minor arc is smaller than 180, and major arc always is greater than 180. These are some standard formulas. Area of a circle is given by the formula pi r square. Radius is half of the diameter. So you can also say that it's pi into d. Oh, sorry. That's the circumference of the circle. So circumference of circle is given by 2 pi r, and since you know that diameter is twice of radius, you can also use the formula for circumference as pi into diameter. Area and perimeter of a circle, area pi r square and the circumference as 2 pi r. One more important property of central angle, the relationship between the central angle and the inscribed angle. So it says that the central angle has to be equal to the measure of the arc. So in a circle, if I give you that this arc is measuring like, let's say 35 degrees, even this angle would be 35 degrees. And if I have one of the angles, that is the inscribed angle, using the same arc, the property says that inscribed angle is always half of the intercepted arc, or basically inscribed angle is half of the central angle. So this measure would be anything 35 by 2, which is 17.5 degrees. It's also shown variably. So if this is alpha and this is theta, I can say theta is alpha by 2, or you can say alpha is twice of theta. Central angle is twice of the inscribed angle. As you can see, central angle is 60, inscribed angle is 30. If at all you draw multiple angles from the same arc, okay, so same segment always subtend congruent arcs. So same segment always generate congruent arcs. If they are congruent arcs, then that means the angles also have to be congruent. The theorems of the circle is that radius is always perpendicular to the tangent. Angle in a semicircle is always 90 because if you look very closely, semicircle arc measure would be 180 degrees, and so basically this diameter always passes through the center of the circle. And if I draw an angle using the same arc AB onto the circumference, which will be inscribed angle, we just now learned that inscribed angle is always half of the central angle. So it is 180 by 2, giving you the measure. That measure of any angle in a semicircle would be 90 degrees. Angles in the same segment are equal. Center is twice of inscribed. Angles in opposite segments are supplementary. Basically, they're cyclic quadrilaterals. And angles in alternate segments are also equal. So that's nothing but your alternate angle theorem. This is the proof. Again, not important, but you all can go through. If two circles have the same radius, then they are called congruent circles. And if they have a common center, then they are called as concurrent circles. This is again talking about the angles of the secants. So a very simple funda it is. So let me explain you all. So whenever the two chords intersect each other, okay, intersect as in they are just passing through each other, so the angle will always have one pair of minor arcs. So let's say this AB is your minor arc, and let's talk about CD as your major arc. Okay, so the angles which are vertically opposite, so theta will always be half of AB plus CD. And if at all there are two secants meeting outside, okay, two secants meeting outside, the angle between those secants, again if you see it has a minor, so let's say this is PQ and let's say this is RS. So there is one minor and there is one major, so the theta in this case would be half of RS minus PQ. So basically it has to be major minus minor. Okay, so the only difference is when they meet inside it has to be major plus minor, if they meet outside it has to be major minus minor. As you can see, the red parts are major or minor. Half of difference if it's outside and half of sum if they are vertical inside. This is another way of representing that theorem. If central angle, then theta is equal to x. If it's inscribed, then it has to be half of the inscribed half of the intercepted arc. If it is inside, it has to be sum of x plus y. If it is outside, then it has to be subtraction of x minus y. This is the application with the numbers, so we all can go through. Radius tangent theorem, we've already done that. Radius is perpendicular to tangent always, and the tangents from an external point to the circle are always congruent. Talking about the common tangents, if there are two circles meeting internally, there are no tangents common. If they are touching internally, okay, only at one point, then there will be just one tangent common. If they are cutting each other, okay, so they are passing through each other, as you can see, they have two tangents common. Whenever they are touching externally, it will have one common tangent and two touching externally, so that will be three common tangents. If they are not touching, so then it will have direct common tangents and transverse common tangents. And if I have two congruent circles, then it can have infinite. If the two circles are overlapping each other, it can have as many tangents as possible. Chord. Important property of chord is that whenever you perpendicular, okay, from the center of the circle to the chord, okay, the theorem says that it always bisects the chord. And also if you see this, this is radius, and we can say that these two triangles are congruent to each other. So if they are congruent, don't you think that if I give you two chords which are equal in lengths, so let's say this is also x, this is also x, the angle made by them at the center will be same, because these four lines, which are the sides of the triangle, would be all radius. Since the chords are same, the angles subtended by them will be same. Hence, we can say that congruent chords are equidistant from the center of the circle, and also congruent chords have congruent central angles and congruent arcs. Okay. Secant tangent rule is that the tangent square is always equal to the secant parts. So basically, whenever in a circle you have a tangent and you have a secant passing, so let's say this is PA, this is PB and PC. So I can say PA square is nothing but PB into PC. Be very careful guys over here, because many people write this as PA square is equal to PB into PC. BC. So basically what they do is separate these two parts, where the actual theorem is related to the PB and from the entire part PC. This is the right and this is the wrong. So be very careful when you are ratifying the theorem. It is the square of the tangent equivalent to the tangential point to the circle and tangential point to the other circle, to other point in the circle. I've also given all examples. You can see it's x square is equal to 16 into 16 plus 25. This is the proof if I have two tangents. Okay, so we just now saw that the tangent square is equal to something PB into PC, right? So PA square is equal to PB into PC. But I can have as many secants. So if I draw another secant, I can say this is also equivalent to PX into PY. So if the left hand sides are same, don't you think that the right hand side can also be same? That's the property of two secants. That's what they've given. A into B is equal to C into D. Why is this true? Again, the theorem or the proof is given to you on the slide. Internally common tangents and externally common tangents. So basically these are called as transverse common tangent, and these kind of tangents are called as direct common tangent. All we need to do is just identify the formulas for finding the lengths of this. So we have a ready-made formula that the direct common tangent is always the square root of the distance between them and the difference between the squares. The only difference between direct common tangent and transverse common tangent is either the difference of the radius will be taken, or in a transverse common tangent the radius will be added. Otherwise the formula remains the same. Next, talking about the trigonometry. So now the sides, angles, circles and everything is done. Now we are talking about the three-side measurements. So basically we'll be focusing only on the right angle triangles. So we'll be dealing with basic ratios, trigonometric identities and problems on heights and distances. The ones who are focusing on SNAP and MAT is all the non-CAT exams, non-CAT and non-ZAT. You have to be very good with problems on heights and distances. So what is trigonometry? Trigonometry is a branch of mathematics that studies the triangles and relationship between the sides. Trigonometry deals with right angle triangles, but if I talk about the trigonometric circle, it is dealing with four quadrants. So first quadrant, second quadrant, third quadrant and the fourth quadrant. So if everybody is familiar with the mnemonic all silver teacups, okay, so that is what you can see in the GIF that is being played. All the trigonometric ratios are positive in the first quadrant. In the second, it's only sine and cosec. In the third, it's only cos and tan. Sorry, cot and tan. And over here, it is only cosine, which is cos, and sec. So let's talk about them. Sine always deals with the opposite side. upon hypotenuse, cos theta is adjacent upon hypotenuse, and tan theta is also given by the formula sine upon cos. So if you do opposite upon hypotenuse and upon adjacent upon hypotenuse, hypotenuse gets cancelled, which gives you the tan theta as opposite upon adjacent. This is the introduction to the other three trigonometric ratios, secant, cosecant, and cotangent. From the formulas, if you see, sine is opposite hypotenuse and cosecant is hypotenuse opposite. So you can say that sine is inverse of cosec. Look at the cos and sec formula, adjacent hypotenuse and hypotenuse adjacent. So what you can say is cos is inverse of secant or sec. And if you look at the tan formulas, tan and cot, they are opposites of each other. So you can say basically tan is inverse of cot. These are the standard values of the trigonometric ratios which you all need to remember. One way of deriving is you can just write you can write 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, divide these values by 4 and just take the square roots. Okay, so if I talk about 0 by 4, the answer is 0. If I talk about 1 by 4, the square root would be half. If I talk about 2 by 4, which is nothing but half, the square root would be 1 by root 2. If I talk about square root of 3 by 4, then that would be nothing but root 3 by 2. And last but not the least, if I do 4 by 4, square root of 1 would be nothing but 1. If you see, these are nothing but your sine values. Cosine or cos values are nothing but just reverse of that. Not the inverse, but reverse. So if you go from right to left, you get sine values. But if you go the same values from right to left, okay, not left to right. If you do ulta, then what you're going to get is the cos values. And as you know that tan theta is given by sine by cos, you can just divide the values. So 0 by 1 is 0. The 2 can get cancelled, giving you 1 by root 3. Entire ratio gets cancelled, so tan 45 is 1. Again, the 2 gets cancelled, giving you the value is root 3 by 1. And anything upon 0 is not defined, so gives you tan 90 as not defined. This is giving you details more about the 180, 270, 360, but what we need to standard remember is only till 90. This is if we add and subtract the angles which are greater than 90, what happens to the signs? Because we know that it's all silver teacups. So not all the ratios are positive in all the quadrants. So what happens when you add, or how to deal with the negative angles, even that is given in this table. So whether to remember this or no depends on you all, but if you remember a few standards, so is at least sine and cos, if you remember, tan can be derived and the others are just inverses of it. So if you see, if cos is positive, even sec is positive. If sine is negative, even cosec is negative. If tan is negative, then even cot is negative. So all are related to each other. All you need to do or remember specifically is just sine and cos. This is giving you in terms of radians. Trigonometric identities is one of the important part which you need to mug up a little bit. So these are your three basic identities which all should know. So there's only one standard, which is sine square plus cos square. The other identities can be derived. So if you derive by sine square, you get sine square by sine square is 1. Cos by sine is cot. So 1 plus cot gives you nothing but cosec square. Similarly, if you divide that by cos square, you get the other identity, which is tan square plus 1 is equal to sec square theta. Another important property is that sine theta is equal to cos 90 minus theta. So the examples are given to you: 40 and 90 minus 40, 50, 90 minus 15, 30 and 90 minus 30. This slide gives you the product to sum formulas and sum to product formulas. Again, you can remember only two of them, others can be derived. So here you need to remember the first and the third formula. And from the half angle, what you need to remember is the tan theta, because that is many a times used in your heights and distance formulas. Whenever you have double angle, you can convert that to half angle and solve the questions. the quadrants which I was talking about, the 4 quadrants, all silver teacups, or there is another mnemonic, add sugar to coffee. So this tells you in detail which trigonometric ratio is positive in the which quadrant. There are sine rules and cosine rules, again purely will differ from question to question where it will be applied, so on and so forth. So as you all can see, even where it is used is given to you. So sine rule is used for finding sides also. Sometimes it can be used to find angles also, and even same thing goes with the cosine rule. One of the examples where sine rule can be applied is this. You can go to the example. Finally, when they wanted to find x, you can see that sine inverse has been taken. Sine inverse is basically you'll be requiring a scientific calculator to calculate that. So this 1 dp tells you that they're approximating the answer to 1 decimal point. Where is the cosine rule applied? An example pertaining to that. Talking about the heights and distances formulas or the problems, we need to be very clear of angle of depression and angle of elevation. Many people have confusion in that. Okay, so if I explain to you all simply, let's say this is a person and this is his sight. Okay, so this is angle of his sight. If he is looking at a building, okay, and if he is looking at the top of the building, this angle will be called as angle of elevation. Similarly, if there was a person standing on the terrace and he is observing this person, so this angle basically with respect to the normal over here, as you can see, the side of the person standing on the terrace and the side of the person standing on the floor or on the road, the sides have to be parallel to each other, and this will kind of form alternate angles. So you can see that these angles are congruent. So this is your angle of elevation and this is your angle of depression. Depression is viewing down and angle of elevation is looking up. Upwards angle form the horizontal to a line of sight from the observer to some point of interest, and downwards is called as depression. This is one of the examples where the tan angles are used and the typical questions which can come in your exams. So from a point 80 meters from the base of a tower, the angle of elevation is 28. How tall is the tower? So we know that tan theta is given as opposite upon adjacent. So it will be basically opposite of x and adjacent is 80. So tan 28 value should be given in your examinations, or if not, they'll have to provide you with the scientific calculators, approximately getting the value of 42.5. Next question. If the angle of depression from the top of the castle to a boat is 25, so this is the angle of depression. If depression is 25, it's obvious that from the boat to the top of the tower, the angle of elevation will also be 25. If the boat is 350 meters away from the castle, how tall is the castle to the nearest meter? Okay, so simple, opposite upon adjacent again, x upon 350. Tan 25 value should be given, and calculating you will get the value as 163.2. Converting degrees to radians or vice versa. From radians to degrees, you just multiply by 180 by pi, and degree to radian, you multiply a pi by 180. This is finding the values of non-standard angles, basically 15, 75 or 65, something like that. So this is how you calculate using your formulas of subtraction and product. So sine A minus B is sine A sine cos B minus cos A sine B. So 15 is nothing but simple 45 minus 30, giving you the values which are standard values, and you can derive. You can also mug up a few values so that you save time in your exams. The standard are only this much: sine 15, cos 15 and tan 15. Others are very rarely used. The other angle which you can keep calculate and keep is the 75 degrees. So for that also I have calculated for you all. Tan 15 is 2 minus root 3, tan 75 is 2 plus root 3, sine 75 is this, and cos 75 is this. This is a detailed calculation of how are you supposed to calculate a non-standard angle. So basically if they ask you what is the value of sine 18, so this is the long procedure that you need to follow for finding the sine of angle. Next chapter for geometry is your coordinate geometry. Coordinate geometry is a very lengthy chapter, but it has only formulas and formulae. So all you have to do is just remember the formulas. So we'll be dealing with the points, then we'll go on to the lines. We'll be talking about the slope of a line and equations which are important with respect to exams, and triangles and circles. Again, these two parts wouldn't be that important as such, but you should know at least the theory of a few. So talking about the points and coordinate geometry, you are going to deal with two-dimensional objects. So we're going to deal with only two axes, which is x and y. So quadrant 1 is all positive. Quadrant 2 is x is negative, y is positive. Quadrant 3 deals with both the things negative, and quadrant 4 is when x is positive and y is negative. The points, the x-axis, the x-coordinate is also called as abscissa, and y-coordinate is also called as ordinate. Okay, so these are some another names for x-axis coordinate and y-axis coordinate. So just to confuse you all, they might use sometimes the words as abscissa and ordinate. All you have to remember is abscissa is x and ordinate is y. Next, if we talk about the reflection can be along the axis, or it can be along the center also. So the few relations or the few reflections you can see is along the y-axis, along the x-axis, or it can be across the center also. It's obvious that if I'm doing across the x-axis, it's obvious that the x-coordinate is not going to change. What will change is the only y-axis coordinate, and that too not numerically but only via signs. Same thing if I shift along y-axis. If you see over here, the y-coordinate remains the same, but x-coordinate will change in sign. And whenever it's the shift via the center, it's the change of sign of both. This is a table which gives you the detailed information. How will the reflection or the image look like? Talking about the lines, the very basic formula is the distance between the 2 points. Distance between the 2 lines is calculated using the Pythagoras theorem. So as you can see, the hypotenuse square is equal to the square of the two sides containing the right angle. So this is the standard formula for distance. It's basically square root of the difference of the x coordinate square and difference of the y coordinate square. It does not matter whether you do x2 minus x1, y2 minus y1, or x1 minus x2 or y1 minus y2. You just have to make sure whatever you do with the x coordinate, the same thing you have to do with y coordinate also. Section formula is when you have two coordinates and something gets cut internally. So let's say coordinates a and b. The coordinates are x1 y1 and x2 y2, and let the coordinate of the point which is cutting the two lines, cutting the line or the 2 points is x and y. So whenever it is internal division, the formula is given by mx2 plus nx1 upon m plus n. This is for x coordinate, and the y coordinate is given by my2 plus ny1 upon m plus n, where m and n are nothing but the ratios in which the point m divides the line AB. So m is nothing but distance from the meeting point or the sectional point to the first point, and n is the part of the ratio of the distance between the cutting point and the second point. As you all can see, this is the formula we talked about. The section can be external section also. So whenever you have external division, okay, so for example, if I give you that this is my line AB, and this would be x1 y1, this would be x2 y2, and let's say this is x and y. The distance over here, this would be m, and this entire thing would be n. So if the point is dividing externally, then the formula is given for x and y as mx2 minus nx1 upon m minus n, and my2 minus n1 upon m minus n. So the only difference between internal and external is that you will have a minus sign in between. Again, if the cutting point is exactly in the center of the line, then that will be the midpoint of those two coordinates. Midpoint is very simple. You just have to take the average of the x coordinates and average of the y coordinates. Triangles have 3 coordinates. So, and triangle deals only with 2 formulas. One is the area of the triangle and the other is the centroid. Like for midpoint, we were dividing and finding the average. Centroid would be again the average of 3 points. So that's how you calculate the centroid of the triangle. Next, if we talk about the determinants, how to find the determinant value. Okay, everybody's familiar with the 2 by 2 determinant. If you have something A, B, C, D, the value is nothing but half of A into D minus C into B, something like this. Again, so if you have a 3 by 3 matrices, okay, determinant A, B, C, D, F, G, H, I. So you take the 3 variables, so A, B, and C. The second variable is negative, so it's like positive, negative, positive. Remember P and P. Now, how are you supposed to calculate the remaining terms? Whenever you choose a variable, you just discard that line, that row, and that column. So what you're left with is this square. So here it would be EI minus FH. If I talk about the second, so B will be cancelled. What I'll be left with is DG and IF. So that would be DI minus GF. And I'm not writing the third, please, it's self-explanatory. So I'll be left with this box. So that's your DH minus GE. That is what has been explained to you, how you're supposed to calculate. Okay. As you can see, the lines have been that whatever variable you consider, that row and that column has been neglected, and whatever the 2 by 2 other determinant is left, you have to do the calculation for the 2 by 2 matrix, and that's how you find the determinant value. So for finding the area of the triangle, okay, you need to have the x coordinates, the y coordinates, and a unit row or unit column. Okay. So this formula can be derived using, so you can make the determinant in this format, or you can write it horizontally also. So x1, x2, x3, y1, y2, y3, and 1, 1, 1. So what is the value of this determinant? It has to be x1, y2 minus y3 minus x2, y1 minus y3 and plus x3, y1 minus y2. This is your exact formula for finding the area of the triangle, where x1, x2, x3 and y1, y2, y3 are the coordinates of your triangle. So if you remember the standard formula, this has to be minus and this has to be y1 minus y3. So if I just interchange these both terms, don't you think that the minus sign will come outside? Okay, negative sign. If you look at this formula very closely, this is giving you plus x2 and the inside is y3 minus y1. Okay. That's just because the negative sign has come outside. So keeping all the terms positive, that is the formula for the area of the triangle that you can remember. I've just given an example. You can go through it later. In center, again, not important formula, but if at all exams like CMAT, MAT and ATMA could focus on this and maybe ask you a single question based on this. Since it is not that important, I haven't put any question regarding to this. Next, a few less important topics for coordinate geometry is if I give you four coordinates. With four coordinates, you can make a quadrilateral and basically a parallelogram. Parallelogram area, we know that it is it is base into height. So if you can calculate the base distance and the height distance, you can do that. Or the other formula is you can find the lengths of the diagonals also. So according to the question, they want these are the vertices of parallelogram and find x and y. So basically they are asking you the x coordinate of point C and y coordinate of point B. So according to the property of parallelogram that diagonals bisect each other, we are just using the midpoint formula to find the coordinates of x and y. What if the origin shifts? Okay, this is our original origin 0, 0. If the origin shifts to h, k, then all the points shift. So the original points for x and y, the shift would be x dash, y dash. How do you apply that to inclination of lines? Okay, so inclination of line is a very important topic with the perspective of any exam. What is important is how to calculate the slope of the line and how are the slopes determined using coordinates or the equations of lines. So first we need to do is what is inclination. Inclination is the measure of the angle of any line with respect to the x-axis. So theta, it could be 90 degree also. Whatever the angle, it always has to deal with the positive side of the x-axis. So inclination of a non-horizontal line is the positive angle theta less than pi measured counterclockwise from the x-axis to the line. So it was always measured counterclockwise. It's never clockwise. Okay. So we know that slope is also given by the formula m is equal to tan theta, where theta is nothing but inclination. And we know that in the first quadrant tan is positive, in the second quadrant tan is negative. Okay, so if you have something 0 to 90, tan will be positive, and if it is something greater than 90, like between 90 and 180, then that will be negative. So as you can see, if the angle is acute, the slope is positive, and if the angle is more than 90 and less than 180, then the inclination is called as negative. Next is the calculation of the slopes. So slope you have to define as delta y upon delta x. So basically change in y coordinate and change in x coordinate. The ratio of it gives you the value of the slope, which is also given by tan theta, theta being the inclination. So as you can see, the vertical rise and horizontal run. So how much is the vertical rise and horizontal run? This gives you the slope of the line. So if you have the coordinates, for example, if you 2, 1 and 5, 5. So change in y coordinates 5 and 1, 4, and change in x coordinates 5 and 2. So you can take 5 minus 1, which is like y2 minus y1, or even if you take 1 minus 5 upon 2 minus 5, it still give you the same answer. So minus 4 and minus 3, the minus gets cancelled, giving you the answer as 4 by 3. Or you can say tan theta, which is nothing but tan 120. Tan 120 also gives you the same value, 4 by 3. These are the three ways in which we can calculate the slope of the line. The generalized form of a line is ax plus by plus c. We've already discussed this in the algebra part when we were dealing with linear equations. There also I had told you that linear equations are nothing but the equations for straight lines. So if you just convert this into some other format, so ax plus by plus c, taking the a's on the other side and then dividing by b, so you'll get y is equal to minus a by b x minus c by b. So minus a by b is, if you write this equation as y is equal to mx plus c, m tells you that it is the slope of the line and c is any constant, which is nothing but the y-intercept. Okay, so that is the generic form, y is equal to mx plus c. This is a generic form, and if the constant value is 0 and I just get the equation as y is equal to mx, this will be the equation of the line passing through the origin. Whenever the constant value is not there in the equation of the line, that means any line passing through the origin will be that. We already talked about positive and negative. If the theta is acute, then it has to be positive. If the theta is obtuse, then it has to be negative. What if the angle is 0? Tan 0 is 0. So hence, whenever we have a line which is parallel to the x-axis, the slope formula tan theta is tan 0, not defined as 0. And if you have the angle as 90 degrees, tan 90 is something what is not defined, or we say that it is infinity. So hence the slope of a line perpendicular to the x-axis will have no slope. This is the proof of why is the slope 0 and why is the slope not defined. Whenever you have a line parallel to y-axis, the slope will be 0, but the equation of the line will always be equal to y is equal to something constant. So if I say this is like y is equal to 0, which is the equation of the x-axis, I can have y is equal to 2, I can have y is equal to 5, I can have negative values, y is equal to -2, so on and so forth. Similarly, if you have something, the equation of y-axis is x is equal to 0, you can have x is equal to 2, you can have x is equal to -2. So whenever you have a perpendicular line, the equation is always of the form x is equal to constant. Angle between the two lines, a very nice formula which deals with the slopes. So tan theta, this theta is not the inclination, so please don't get confused guys, nothing to do with the slope. So this theta over here is the angle between the two intersecting lines, which deals with the slopes of the individual lines m1 minus m2, 1 plus m1 m2. This is the formula from where the parallel lines and perpendicular lines conditions are derived. So if I say that the theta is 0, tan 0 is 0, the fraction is having the value 0 when the numerator is 0. So basically m1 minus m2 has to be 0. Hence the condition for the values to be parallel to each other, or the lines to be parallel, the slopes have to be equal. And if the angle is 90, when is the fraction value not defined, or when is it infinity? When the denominator of a fraction is 0. So if I say 1 plus m1 m2 is 0, that means m1 m2 has to be, the product of m1 m2 has to be -1. That's given over here. So if m1 m2 is equal to -1, then you can say that the angle between the two lines is 90 degrees. This is one of the examples that I've given for two lines and finding the angle between them. Equation of the line, like I said, y is equal to mx plus c. That was just the equation of the line, but how to derive or how to get the equation of the line if I give you two coordinates? Okay, so if I give you something, the coordinates as 2 and 5, let that be x coordinate and the y coordinate of a point. Okay, so if you substitute the y1 and x1 value over here, so that would be just y minus 5 is equal to, slope has to be obviously defined. So if I slope is something 3 by 5, so 3 by 5 multiplied by x minus 2. So you just cross multiply 5y minus 25, 3x minus 6. So 5y is equal to 3x plus 19. That should be the value. Or I have given you one more example. Slope intercept form is when you have the slope also and you have the y-intercept. As we know in the equation y is equal to mx plus c, c is called the y-intercept. So this is the standard formula for equation of a line. You just substitute the x value and the b value in the equation to get the equation of the line. If you have 2 points, how to find the equation when you have 2 points? So we know that if you have 2 points, something like 2, 5 and 4, 6, with 2 points you can find the slope. So that is change in y upon change in x. So, and if you take any one of the points, let's say x1, y1, you have the point and you have the slope. You can use the slope point form and find the equation of the line. But if you have two different points, the formula is given of this sort.
Eventually, if you look very deeply, this y2 minus y1 and x2 minus x1 is nothing but your m. So y minus y1 is equal to m into x minus x1 is what your equation originally was. Intercept format, whenever I give you intercepts are nothing but the line where it cuts the x-axis and the y-axis. So basically the point where it cuts the y-axis, that distance is called as the y-intercept, and the distance from the origin till the line cuts the x-axis is called your x-intercept. So if your x-intercept is defined as a and your y-intercept is defined as b, you have a standard formula for finding the equation of the line, which is x by a plus y by b is equal to 1. The least used formula is the perpendicular distance formula. So if I give you a random point and a line which is very random, what is the perpendicular distance between these two lines? So if the point is x1 y1 and this line is of the form ax plus by plus c, all you got to do is just substitute the x and y values in this. So the modulus value, and the denominator will have the square root of a square plus b square. I've also given you one example you can carry out later. Now instead of a point and a line perpendicular distance, I can have another line also. So if at all I have two parallel lines and I want to find the distance between those parallel lines, since their lines are parallel, the slopes will be same. The slopes will be m and m, but the only difference would be in the constant values of both the equations. So in the numerator, instead of the line like in the previous formula, you just have to write the difference of the constant values in the numerator. Equation of a circle standard is like x square plus y square is equal to r square when your circle has a center at the origin. But if your origin shifts to something h comma k, so you just have to subtract the values x minus h, y minus k is equal to r square. Radius does not change. What will change will be the values of x and y. So I've given you all examples also. The radius at the center has been shifted to 2 comma 3. So as you can see, h and k, h has been substituted here, k has been substituted here, and the radius square has been taken over here. If it's center, then you don't have to substitute, or even if you want to substitute in the formula x minus h square and y minus k square, all you got to substitute is 0 comma 0 in place of h and k. That was a standard. The general equation of the circle is this. If you expand this using the squares, all you get is this formula, the school formula, x square plus y square plus 2gx plus 2fy plus c. This is another way of writing the equation of the circle when it's given in the general form. I've given you an example also. Again, very like not that frequently asked in exams, but if at all it comes, then the formula might be handy. Very least important, what about if you have ellipses and its equations to be formed? So the standard equation is x square by b square plus y square plus a square, where a is to be greater than b. So these are the terminologies that you should remember: co-vertex, minor axis, vertex, and major axis, where your a and b are nothing but the distances of the x-axis and the y-axis. Basically they are nothing but again your intercepts, but since it is ellipse, ellipse equation will be in the format of square, because as you can see, this is like a parabola, two parabolas combined together, which gives you one ellipse. Next, let's deal with the another formula based chapter, which is your mensuration. Mensuration will deal with two-dimensional also and three-dimensional also. So we'll be dealing with the formulas for areas and volumes. This is all in one formula. We'll be looking into each of the figures in detail. So areas, volumes, and a little bit shedding light upon the frustum. Mensuration is a branch of mathematics which deals with the study of geometric shapes, areas, volumes, and its related parameters. Euler's theorem deals with the faces and the vertices. It tells you that the sum of the faces and vertices is also always equal to edges plus 2. So F stands for faces, V stands for vertices, E stands for edges. You take any three-dimensional object, this will always be true. If it is not, then it's not a three-dimensional object. This is the application of one of the examples of a polyhedron. Here they have taken a cube or a cuboid over here. Basic difference between pyramid and prism. Pyramid has to have one vertex and its top is just a simple vertex, whereas prism has to has a parallel surface. So if it's a square in the base, it has to be square in the top. If it's a triangle in the base, it has to be triangle in the top. If it's a rectangle in the base, then it has to be rectangle in the top. So prism is joined by giving you all height. So basically joining the two faces. Okay, two similar faces, two congruent faces have to be joined, and thus a prism is formed. Whereas pyramid has to have only one vertex, and all the faces will be triangular faces, because whatever, let's say if I draw a pentagonal base, okay, a five-sided figure, and if I just make a pentagonal pyramid, that is something how it will look like. So all the faces will be triangular. The base figure can be anything. Let's start with prisms first. Prism formula is very simple. Its volume is equal to area of the base into height. So whatever the area of the base is, that you just have to multiply with the height. So if I'm talking about a square, so it's something L square. If I give height also equivalent to the length of the square, you just have to multiply one more parameter. So area of the base multiplied by the height, that gives you the volume. As you can see, pi r square is the area of the circle, then length into breadth or length into width is the area of a rectangle, and whatever the area of this part is, guys, they've just said A and multiplied by h. Talking about the areas of a three-dimensional object is, one will be the lateral surface area and the total surface area. Now when I'm talking about the lateral surface area only deals with the side faces. For example, if I'm giving you this, I'll be dealing only with the front faces, so like 1, 2, the back face, 3, the left face, 4, the side face, but excluding the top and the bottom. Whenever you're talking about lateral surface area, you never talk about the top surface and never talk about the bottom. So if I'm talking about this has 4 lateral and 4 vertical, including the top and the base, it has 8 faces. So if you subtract the 2, you'll be just left with 6 faces. You just calculate the area of all the surfaces, that will give you the lateral surface area. The standard formula, if you have something length, breadth and height, so you'll have length into breadth plus breadth into height plus height into length. So that is twice of all. Because you have length and breadth in the top, you have length and breadth at the bottom also. So every face will be twice, hence the 2 over here in the formula. And the difference between lateral surface area and total surface area. Total surface area, you'll have to include the 2 surfaces that were removed in the lateral surface area formula. So here you will include the top also and the bottom also. And in the prism, it is always 2 congruent shapes in the top and the base. So all you just add is twice the area of the base to it. You get the total surface area. So as you can see, lateral area is L, base perimeter P and H. Yeah, so that's also one of the formulas for deriving the lateral surface area. Like your volume deals with the area of the base into the height. Okay, that's your volume. For lateral surface area, it's always the perimeter of the base multiplied by the height. Okay. So if you look at the formula for a cuboid, so you look at the formula, it's LB plus BH. You look over here, 2L plus 2 width. So if I'm giving you a rectangular base, length and breadth, The perimeter would be L plus B. You just multiply by the height, you get the formula as LH plus twice of BH. And if you want to add twice the base, all you got to do is just multiply one more. That's nothing but, so length and height is done, breadth and height is done. What is left is length and height that needs to be added. So this is your general formula. And whatever I said, that all the surface will be twice, this is just opening the rectangular prism. So as you can see, length into height is twice, length into width is twice, and width into height is also twice. That's the total surface area of a rectangular prism. Rectangular prism volume is nothing but length into breadth into height. Because the base is a rectangle, you just calculate length into breadth, and all you do is just multiply by the height. Talking about the longest diagonal, any three-dimensional object prism will always have a long diagonal which will be larger than the face diagonal. So as you can see, so if I'm talking about the bottom face, this length is A and the breadth is B. This will be the bottom face diagonal, guys. This is the face diagonal. But when I'm talking about the body, okay, from this corner to this corner, basically from point G to A, that would be something which will be going through inside. So that is the longest diagonal, and the longest diagonal formula is given as root of A square plus B square plus C square, which is nothing but your length square plus breadth square plus height square. That's given to you diagonal of a cuboid. The difference between a cuboid and a cube is all the sides are same. So whenever you have B and H, just replace that with L. Okay, so the thing over here, so length plus length into length. Okay, so this is 2L. 2L into 2L gives you 4L square. Then over here, L square plus L square plus L square gives you root of 3 times L square. So that gives you root 3 times L, longest diagonal. And area was L into B into H. So here it will be L into L into L, giving you the formula as L cube. Okay. So this was the generalized formula I'm talking about. Volume of prism is always the base area multiplied by the height. Cylinder base is pi r square and multiplied by the height, so gives you the volume as pi r square h. Lateral surface area, the perimeter of the circle, you see the circumference formula 2 pi r. So perimeter of the circle multiplied by the height, that gives you the lateral surface area. And so 2 pi rh. And when you're talking about the total surface area, you just add the area of the base and area of the bottom, which is nothing but squares. So you can take 2 pi r common, and that gives you the formula for the total surface area for a cylinder. Just the difference that sometimes by nomenclature you will get the formula for a curved surface area, because cylinder is curved in shape. It is sometimes called as curved surface area also instead of the lateral surface area. So do not get confused when you come across the words like curved surface area. Talking about a cone is nothing but simple. It's 1/3 of the cylinder. Okay. Hence the formula for any prism, if you want to derive from a pyramid, whenever you want to derive the pyramid formula for prism, you just divide by 1/3. So as you can see, this pi r square is the formula for cylinder. You do 1/3 to get the volume of the cone. Slant height, as you can see that this is making a right angle triangle, so you can say h square plus r square is equal to the slant height square. So if you want slant height, you just take the square root of the terms. That's what's given to you here. Lateral surface is also just pi rs. So we generally are used to using this term as L. So the lateral surface area is given by pi r L. The total surface area is nothing but the lateral surface area plus the base area, because you have a only single vertex and you have only one base, so there will be no top surface over here. Hence you add the area only once.
Frustum is something what is remaining when you cut the pyramid and you get two different parts. So you get a smaller prism for sure, and whatever the remaining part is, that is called as the frustum. So whether it's a cone or any lateral side pyramid, that's either called as frustum of a cone or frustum of a pyramid. What you all can do is apply the concept of BPT, because if I'm talking about over here in the prism, if you check, the triangle is forming. Since the cutting edge will be parallel to the base, you can apply the BPT. So whatever the height of the small pyramid is and whatever the height of the large pyramid is, that will always be in the proportion. So h1 upon h2 will always be equal to the sides ratio also. So if I say this is s1, this is s2, that ratio would be equal to s1 by s2. For example, let's say if I'm giving you a cone, okay, and I'm cutting it, so whatever will be remaining on the bottom side will be the frustum. So if I'm giving you that the radius of the cone originally was let's say 18 centimeter and the height was something around 24 centimeter. So if the new radius which is being cut is something like 6 centimeter, okay, so what will be the height of the new? Since I know that according to BPT, or we can also apply similar triangles, this angle is common, this angle is corresponding, this angle is also corresponding, the two triangles are similar. So I can say that ratio of the radiuses will be equal to ratio of the heights. So let this be h. So if this is nothing but 1/3, even height would be 1/3. So height value would be nothing but 24 by 3, giving you the value as 8. That's how your frustum is developed. So either you find the volume by the ready-made formula, which is very least used, but what you can do is I'll have a big cone and after cutting I'll have a small cone also. So if you do the big cone minus the small cone, what you'll be left with is the volume of the frustum. A simpler way to calculate. Next is your sphere. So what I remember is sphere is made up of 4 circles, which gives me an easier way to calculate the surface area. So surface area of a sphere is given as 4 pi r square and its volume is given by 4 by 3 pi r cube. This is something you have to mug up, guys. And same thing if I'm talking about the hemisphere. Don't forget, guys, that sphere has no extra surface or no lateral surface. So you talk about the lateral surface area, the curved surface area, or the total surface area, every area is same, which is nothing but 4 pi r square. But since hemisphere has a flat base, you all can see over here also, hemisphere will have two types of areas. One would be the curved surface area, which will be dealing only with the curved part of the hemisphere. So that would be nothing but 2 pi r square. So if I'm talking about the total surface area, even the base will get added. So the base, you all can see, is nothing but a circle. So one more circle will be added to that. So giving the formula to 3 pi r square, and the volume is nothing but just half of this, which will be nothing but 2 by 3 pi r cube. This is some relation between a sphere and a cylinder. Again, if you remember, then it's fine, but even if you don't remember, not a big deal. Some people are used to or accustomed to ready-made shortcuts or formulas which can be useful directly for the application of solving of sum. So for them it's this. Sphere and hemisphere derivation and the formulas at once in a simple diagram format. Tetrahedron, one of the nice figures, or which is kind of frequently asked in many of the geometry exams, entrance tests. So whenever you talk about a tetrahedron is made up of 4 equilateral triangles. So if I have 4 equilateral triangles and I draw a pyramid with respect to that, okay, so the pyramid will look something like this. That's what is being shown over here. So you see, this is your base and these are the other 3 faces. So if I just open up that, the surface will look something like this. This surface will also be equilateral, this surface will also be equilateral, and this surface will also be equilateral. Okay, so the surface area is nothing but root 3 times the side square, because it is one area is root 3 by 4 side square, but now you have 4 such triangles, so 4 gets cancelled, giving you the value root 3 a square, and its volume is something that you'll have to mug up. There is no derivation for that, so root 2 by 12 a cube. You can also cancel this 12 as 2 into 6. So if you split the 12, you can cancel the 1 root 2's. So basically it is a cube upon 6 root 2. So you either remember this or you remember this, your choice.